Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Barbara Gross, Dean of the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study, and I'm very pleased to welcome you to the Institute's Rama Mehta Lecture for this year. Before we begin, some logistical information. The exits are in the front and back of the room. If you've got cell phones, pagers, or other similar devices, would you please turn them off? There will be a short question and answer period after the lecture. There'll be a microphone brought to the center aisle, and if you would line up at the microphone with your questions, we would appreciate it. Finally, you are all invited to a reception downstairs after the talk. Rama Mehta, for whom this lecture is named, was a scholar of family and modern Indian social life. She was a fellow at the Bunting Institute at Radcliffe for 2 years in the late 1960s. Her many publications include the book India, Now and Through Time, on which she collaborated with Catherine Galbraith. She has been called an unusual woman for any generation of any age in any country. The Rama Mehta Lectureship was established by Professor John Kenneth Galbraith and Catherine Galbraith in memory of Mehta, who died in June 1978. This lectureship honors Mehta's interests and work by bringing to the Radcliffe Institute and the greater Harvard community outstanding leaders in the arts, public affairs, and science who possess a deep understanding of the problems faced by women in developing countries. Today's speaker has repeatedly displayed the kind of deep understanding the Rama Mehta Lecture was designed to honor. The Right Honorable Joyce Banda, Vice President of Malawi, hails from Malamia village in Zamba in southern Malawi. In 1975, as a 25-year-old mother of 3, she left an abusive marriage and built a successful garment manufacturing business. 15 years later, to improve the status of Malawian women more generally through economic self-reliance, Banda founded the National Association of Businesswomen of Malawi. Since its establishment in 1990, this association has empowered tens of thousands of women across Malawi by providing them access to credit, training, and technology. In 1997, Banda's work with the National Association of Businesswomen of Malawi earned her the Africa Prize, which is awarded annually by the Hunger Project to individuals who lead the way to end hunger sustainably in Africa. Banda used her award money from the Africa Prize to establish the Joyce Banda Foundation, a rural development program with initiatives in health, agriculture and food security, water and sanitation, and orphan care and education. The foundation has also established a number of primary and secondary schools with the goal of promoting the education and development of Malawian girls. Banda has dedicated her political career as well to advancing the welfare of women and children in Malawi, championing legislation against domestic violence and child abuse. Her political appointments have included Minister for Gender, Children's Affairs, and Community Services, and Minister for Foreign Affairs, as well as her current position as the Vice President of Malawi. She is the first woman to hold that position. Banda has also been appointed to serve on the United Nations Global Leaders Council for Reproductive Health. Among her many awards are the Women of Substance Award from the African Women Development Fund, the International Award for the Health and Dignity of Women, the International Award for Entrepreneurship Development, and the 100 Heroines Award. Vice President Banda has demonstrated at every stage of her philanthropic and political careers persistence and creativity. Repeatedly, her strategic vision has had a lasting impact on the well-being of women in Malawi. Thanks to her efforts, Many thousands of people have been freed from abuse and poverty, and they have been given greater educational and economic possibilities. As we launch a week of activities at the Institute focused on developing a better understanding of the ways gender affects and influences key areas of life in the developing world, we are honored to have Vice President Banda with us today to deliver the Rama Mehta Lecture on economic empowerment as a tool for social and political empowerment of women in Africa. Please join me in welcoming the Vice President.
Good evening, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I wish to recognize Dean Barbara Cross, faculty members, students from Radcliffe Institute and other colleges, Harvard community, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to first start my presentation by thanking Dean Barbara Cross and all other members of this distinguished group that were involved in facilitating that we attend this function today. I just wish the weather was more friendly than it is. I was here last year in June. I was invited by the School of Public Health, and I didn't know that it can get as vicious as this. In 1989, young and in the business sector, I was invited by the US government to come on a study tour. And they brought us here in February, and they took us to Minnesota. And I failed to attend 2 of the meetings they had arranged for me there. But I was young then and could get away with things like that. I wasn't quite that lucky today. And so I'm here, and I would like to say how pleased I am and how grateful I am that you invited me and my delegation. It is my pleasure to make this presentation, and excuse me if I include a lot of examples. I'm an African woman, and therefore as African women we are storytellers. I just sincerely hope that at the end of this you will enjoy my presentation. When I was invited to speak, I knew from the onset that I wanted to speak on a subject that is very dear to my heart, and that is women's empowerment in Africa. It is one subject that I can speak with some authority, being an African woman myself. I have spent 20 years working with women, and today I speak to you from my personal experience. I wish to start my lecture by contextualizing my remarks that while I'll talk about the challenges that women face in Africa, not all is gloom. As an African leader, I strongly believe that it is my responsibility to share with you about the challenges that we face on that continent, but more so to show optimism that the challenges Africa is facing can be surmounted. So I want to situate my lecture on that premise, that Africa is and remains hopeful for its future. Africa continues to make progress in a number of areas. Examples of such progress include the establishment of democracies in most parts of the continent. Africa is making good strides in attaining food sufficiency. Africa is maturing in homegrown conflict resolution mechanisms, and our economies are growing. In fact, I'm aware that several reports have shown that African economies showed admirable resilience during the recent global economic crisis. The main contributor to the resilience has been Africa's generally sound macroeconomic position, which allowed for fiscal and monetary stimuli to soften the global downturn. Africa's attempts to accelerate attainment of the MDGs remain steady and resolute. The 2010 annual report on assessing progress towards the MDGs, produced by the African Union Commission, shows that most countries have consistently advanced towards all the targets of the MDGs, in spite of the recent food, fuel, financial, and economic crisis. Key areas of progress include reduction in the proportion of undernourished people on the continent. The continent is also well positioned to meet the universal primary education target. On the health front, commendable progress has been made in reduction of tuberculosis, and the proportion of children sleeping under insecticide-treated nets is increasing in Africa's drive to combat malaria. However, we have significant challenges in areas of maternal health, HIV and AIDS, and some aspects of child health. I'm proud of the achievements Africa has made, but I'm equally disturbed that while we are making strides in some areas, the progress in real women's empowerment remains painfully slow. The challenges that face the women of Africa reduce quality of life to a dangerous extent. Imagine women work 2/3 of Africa's labor hours. They produce 70% of the food, but receive only 10% of the income on the continent. And yet, the earnings of African women are spent on their children and households to a greater extent than those of men are spent on the same things. Furthermore, women own not even 1% of the property in Africa. Not even 1%. In terms of poverty, all but 2 of the 30 poorest countries in the world are in Africa. Rural women are greatly affected by poverty. Men often travel to industrial areas to work, while women keep the rural economy running. Women are the majority of the subsistence farmers who produce food to keep most countries food secure. And I'm sure you have heard or seen a picture of this typical African woman farmer. My president has said the women in Africa do all their farming in the deep heat of Africa, carrying a baby on her back and using unmechanized and primitive tools. And we contrast that with the farmers of the US that go on their farm in an air-conditioned tractor, complete with music. And given recent changes in weather patterns, when drought or floods ruin crops, it is women who are burdened to find alternative sources of food for their families. Lack of safe and clean drinking water is a problem for African women. More than 300 million people in Africa lack clean water. African women may walk up to 5 miles a day to fetch water. In conflict zones, fetching water is a life-threatening chore for women and girls. They risk being raped or molested as they walk long distances to water fetching points. Where communities do not have clean water and waterborne diseases are prevalent, women face the additional burden of caring for the sick. I have found that very small programs with little amount of money can change this situation for women, especially to access clean water. 2 years ago, a village in my constituency had no clean water. But above their villages, there was a big pipe passing through that was taking water to the city. Because the village was on a slope, we couldn't even drill boreholes. A friend of mine by the name of Philip, who was working for a very wealthy woman in Malawi, visited this area, and I said to him, go and ask your boss if he can donate $50,000, because I'm told that's all it will cost for 20 villages to have clean water. He went to his boss and came back and said, no, she says, no, that is not part of her program. And he knew that I was very disappointed because this boss of his had used me and my time to come up with a concept for his project. And I said, if you're doing this for Malawians, I will never charge you. So at least she should have provided the $50,000. And because he felt as bad as I did, he promised me that he was coming to the US and was going to identify somebody who would support that project. He came, I found an American man who is married to an African woman. And when he explained the story, he pulled out his checkbook and wrote a check of $50,000. He brought the check to Malawi, gave it to me. I went to government and said, I need technical support. They provided technical support. I went to the community and said, I want you to get involved. So the community itself dug the trenches where they wanted the pipes and the taps of water. Because they were personally involved, they brought the taps right outside their household. The first day we opened that water, the first tap, there was dancing, there was crying in that community. And I said to Philip, we shall never rest until we meet this gentleman. And indeed, 6 months later, he came, and the villagers gave him a title in the village. $50,000 has changed the lives of 30,000 people in those villages forever. Why is it that we are finding it difficult to do it across Africa? As you are aware, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, another problem facing Africa today is the scourge of HIV and AIDS. The impact of HIV and AIDS has really reversed some of the gains that Africa made on women's situation. Statistics show that about 59% of those living with HIV are female. There's a gender element to the illness in Africa. Lack of control over their sexual reproductive rights for most African women increases their susceptibility to HIV as they have less power to negotiate for safe sex. Most women stay in high-risk relationships due to their economic dependency on their spouses, and also due to pressure to conform to some cultural expectations. Women and girls are the main providers of primary care when household members are chronically sick due to AIDS-related illnesses. Thank goodness that a number of countries have rolled out free or affordable ARVs, which indeed have proven to prolong lives of people living with HIV. My own country, Malawi, is a role model in being able to provide free ARVs to people living with AIDS. We are currently providing more than 90% of people in need of the drugs. Before these drugs were available and accessible, and people with HIV developed AIDS, they were ill for prolonged periods. They needed care. And guess what? It is the women that provided this care. This provision of free care reduced the productive capacity of women in those families as all their labor was diverted to caring for the sick. And in some instances, women care providers also get infected in the process of caring for the sick. I remember at one point, a few years back, women were forced to use their bare hands in nursing their sick, even when risk of infection through bodily fluids was very high. And this is traditional. You don't want your mother-in-laws to see you nursing your husband wearing gloves. They will blame you of not having sympathy or not loving your husband. I'm worried about the trends even now emerging in sub-Saharan Africa, that in addition to women being the face of AIDS, it is actually young women that are more at risk. Statistics on the number of younger women contracting HIV show that in the age of 15 to 24 age group, 75% of those with HIV and AIDS are women. In Malawi, statistics from various studies suggest that young girls may even be 4 to 6 times likely to contract the virus than their male counterparts. This higher risk is due to young girls being prone to intergenerational relationships with older men who are more sexually active than the girls. And in some cases, girls, especially orphans, may be wooed to engage in some risky relationships as a coping mechanism to orphanhood. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, women and girls in Africa experience the same kind of violence and sexual violence that women in other parts of the world experience. A common weapon of war in struggles is systematic rape of women. I'm sure most of us remember the horrific incident of mass rape that occurred in one of the Central African countries last year. Forced marriages, being sold into servitude, and early marriage are also struggles some African women face. Back home in Malawi, I have a fresh case in my hand. It is a case of a young teenage girl who called on me to rescue her from forced marriage. This girl came to my state house and met my special advisor. The story that she told her, she brought her to my office. I just could not believe that a family was pushing this girl into marriage because they owed this man who was 25 years older than her some money. So I took the trouble to phone the aunt. And what she said to me, I cannot even repeat here. She was so angry with me that I was even suggesting that I should give this girl a scholarship to go to school. As I'm speaking now, she has been running. They've been looking for her, the family. They caught up with her, took her by bus, jumped out of the bus, and the family is keeping her in Lilongwe, so all of us now can't reach her. I sincerely hope that time will be the best cure, that we can rescue this girl and send her to school. Because keeping girls in school is the only way we can ensure Africa's future. But unfortunately, our girls face complex problems. In fact, the slow attainment of MDG 3 is partly due to effects of HIV/AIDS, especially because of its impact on female orphans. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, allow me to talk about two most pressing problems that women and girls face in Africa. I will start with the problem of limited access to education opportunities. Reports show that 2/3 of the 40 million African children who do not attend school are girls. While the 2010 African Union report I referred to earlier shows some improvement in enrollment and retention of girls, there are still some practical challenges that school-going girls face. These include the burden of household work, which results in absenteeism, lack of proper sanitary facilities in schools, especially for girls in puberty, sexual harassment by male teachers and walking long distances to schools, which poses a security hazard for girls. The African Union report shows that while most countries may achieve gender parity at primary school level, unfortunately parity decreases in secondary school, and the gap is widest in tertiary education. There are fewer girls at the two higher levels. What breaks my heart is an example that I'll give. I was born in a village in Zomba, 15 kilometers from Zomba town. I was privileged that my father was a policeman. But my grandmother insisted that I should have the best of two worlds, living in the urban area, but also spending a lot of time at grassroots. My grandmother was convinced that's the only way they can prepare me to be a good wife in the future, is when I am acquainted with village life. I thank God that I had that opportunity, because my grandmother didn't know that she was preparing me to be a better leader in government one day. So in the village, I had a very good friend. Her name is Chrise. And every Friday, I went from school into the bus to Domasi, 15 kilometers away, and Chrise would always be waiting for me at the bus stage. Chrise was not as fortunate as myself, so she would be waiting there to hear stories from the city. But there was nobody who knew about village life, picking wild fruits, picking crabs, carrying a pail all the way to her head without help, like Chrise. And she taught me all these things that I will forever be grateful for. Because I'm able to appreciate the lives of rural women because I tasted it through Chrise. But going to school, Chrise was going to school in the village, I was going in the urban school. But Chrise was obviously brighter than me because she was the best in her class from standard 1 all the way to standard 8, which was the final class in primary school. We both passed our primary school exams. I was selected to go to Providence Secondary School. She was selected to go to St. Mary's Secondary School, both the best schools for girls in Malawi. She went one term and dropped out because the parents could not raise the $30 she was supposed to pay for a term. I went on to finish my school because my father could pay. I go back to the village every day and look at Chrise, still where she was. At 15, she got married. 2 weeks ago, she phoned me to tell me that the child that she had at 15 is dying of AIDS. So Chris has lost out. No education, a child early, the child is dying, an abusive husband. Every program that I have of the Joyce Banda Foundation in that village, Chris is involved. And what makes me angry is why should I be standing here as vice president and not Chris? The lack of opportunities for the girl child is what must be a wake-up call for all of us. We must all stand to support the African girl child, because we might be leaving behind doctors and nurses and engineers. The last challenge I want to talk about is that of maternal mortality. The main causes of unacceptable maternal deaths include lack of skilled attendants at birth and safe abortions, early pregnancies. And since sub-Saharan Africa, HIV prevalence has also elevated maternal mortality ratios. In Malawi, the maternal mortality ratio is one of the highest on the continent. It is 807 per 100,000 live births, only second to Sierra Leone. This is too high and unacceptable. And when I served as African Union Goodwill Ambassador for Safe Motherhood in my country, I went flat out to challenge communities, policymakers, and donors about this problem. I particularly focused on the need for effective community participation in addressing maternal death. In my opinion, it is an irony and it is unacceptable for a woman to die giving birth and giving life to another person. Distinguished guests, as you have heard, women in Africa face a number of challenges. The problems are connected and they need effective solutions. I know there have been many interventions tried and tested, but I for one believe that two of the effective interventions that can solve women's problems in Africa lie in women's economic empowerment and investment in the girls' education. I have isolated the two interventions because each of these single interventions has the ability to address more than one problem, result in more returns on a woman's life and the benefits that accrue at a wider level. I'm a strong champion of women's economic empowerment, and I say this from experience. Born in an African setup, I married early at 21. Unfortunately, my marriage didn't work. I was very clear at the end of that marriage, 10 years, that the reason why I had been abused is because I was not economically empowered and was not effectively contributing to the household. So in 1981, I marched out. I took my 3 children, which was not what you were supposed to do in those days. Socially, the problems that came with divorce, women preferred to remain in an abusive marriage. But I walked out for the sake of myself and my children. Like any end of a marriage, it was a painful moment for me, but it was also a wake-up call. I endangered my life and that of my 3 small children in a violent home because I had no means to survive. I was not economically independent. Charged by the lesson this failed marriage taught me, I vowed to myself that I would work towards my economic independence. I started my business, as Barbara said, provided for my children, and later on established the largest industrial garment manufacturing business ever owned by a Malawian woman. I was exporting my products to other neighboring countries. I earned my independence, and not only was I able to provide for my children, but I was also able to go shopping for a better husband. And I was able to bargain and found myself a very good husband. In fact, his nephew is here. While I had achieved this for myself, the question I had was what was happening to other women who were not as brave as I had been. What about those who were widows? Those that were in female-headed households? What about those in abusive marriages? This question bothered me, and I vowed to find means of reaching out to women and help them access an opportunity for economic security. Therefore, in 1989, after a successful study tour of the USA, I returned home and formed the National Association of Business Women. I shall forever be grateful to this government for the support and the encouragement they gave me during those formative years. NABI's goal was to provide economic empowerment to women through microfinance. NABI's programs were designed to not just give credit, but to also support women with business training, information, and life skills. NABI grew, and after 5 years of establishment, we had reached out to 15,000 women with credit. In 1999, 10 years after our establishment, an evaluation by the USAID showed that our members, 73% of our members had come out of poverty forever, and that 84% of our members had gained respect at household level and were contributing to decisions at household level and making decisions about their lives without the interference of their husband. It also found that 40% of the women that we had supported had graduated to small and medium enterprises. NABI transformed poor women from not knowing where their next meal came from to being providers of their families. National Association of Business Women members were empowered to negotiate for family planning with their husbands, a thing that could not happen before. NABI members enjoyed elevated social status and became leaders of their community groups and initiatives. About 10 members ended up in politics and all the way to ministerial positions. Ladies and gentlemen, such is the power that economic independence gives women. It gives women a voice. It allows us to make choices about our lives, our health. It gives us the confidence to participate in leadership and gives us the much needed respect at various levels of society. To date, the National Association of Business Women has 50,000 members, making it the largest microfinance organization for women in Malawi. The next intervention I championed is an effective strategy to improve women's social condition in Africa in education. Girls' education is not just a good investment, it is the very best investment we all can make. It has been proven that it helps to improve health and reduce fertility. Children of more educated mothers are healthier, better nourished, and more likely to survive beyond their infant years. Women who are literate are able to access critical information about their rights and other critical services. Educated women improve their employability and have means of earning a decent living. My heart bleeds. My heart bleeds when a girl doesn't have an opportunity to get education. In 1998, when I started the Joyce Banda Foundation, my idea was to provide education opportunities to girls. Because working in the National Association of Business Women, it became very clear that when I went out in the villages, there were only women. Men had gone to school, women were still at home. Their brothers were teachers, were doctors, were engineers. Because when the resources were low at household level, the boys went to school, the girls didn't go. And I made up my mind that if I was going to get any opportunity in the future, I was going to contribute towards girls' education. So in 1998, opening the school, on the first day, 3 girls came and enrolled. One of them, her name is Dorothy. And Dorothy, what I decided to do, having worked with donors for many years, international NGOs, I got frustrated that sometimes you feel you're not making sense. Because you want to apply for grants, they don't give those grants to you. Instead, they want to come to Africa and believe that they can solve our problems. And yet we know what to do. So what we are looking for is partnership. So I decided that I was going to form a company, to open schools where parents would make contributions in order for me to make the money to go and educate poor children free. So Dorothy went to the urban school because I hadn't started the free secondary schools. And after the first term, the second term, I asked the headmistress if we could have a prize-giving ceremony where I could recognize the best student of the previous term. And the headmistress said, no, but it was Dorothy, but she's left. She left because she couldn't pay the $30 that we asked her to contribute, because Dorothy lost both parents. And I said, you didn't tell me, so I don't know how you're going to do it, but you're going to find this child. The headmistress went 8 hours away, found Dorothy, brought her back to school. She was the best student for 5 years, passed and was selected to go to Malawi University. She went to and got herself a degree in agricultural economics, passed with credit, got a scholarship to go to Makerere University in Uganda to do a master's degree. She's back home in Malawi working. Last month she came to me to show me her new car. She just bought a car. But she also told me that she had adopted 5 more girls and she was sending them to school. I'm pleased to inform you, ladies and gentlemen, that because of my conviction that girls' education is the best investment we can make, I personally decided to set up the Edith Scholarship Fund. This fund, named in memory of my mother, supports underprivileged and bright female students to continue with their secondary education. The background to this is that in Malawi, while primary school is free, at delivery, secondary school is not free. had found out that a number of girls were dropping out of school, getting into early marriages because of demand for school fees. Therefore, I decided to provide these scholarships to the needy girls. Currently, the fund is providing scholarships to about 2,000 girls in various schools, including in the Joyce Panda Foundation school, which I established in my home village. This school is among the very few, I think 4, free secondary schools in Malawi. This is my humble contribution to girls' education in my country. Resources permitting, I would like to reach 2,000 more girls by the end of the year. It costs me $50 to send a child to school for a term, $150 for a year, and $600 for the 4 years that she needs to complete her secondary education. Now I know that the 2 issues I'm championing are not new. These are issues you have heard about or know are being done elsewhere. Women's economic empowerment is not a new concept. Girls' education is not a new intervention. The question, therefore, is, why is it that interventions that have proven to work for women take a long time to be institutionalized and implemented at wider scales? Why are we still grappling to improve women's situation in Africa? It is these questions that have led me to begin to think that if more women were entrusted in leadership position, the situation of women in Africa would perhaps change for the better. Somehow, most women leaders, when they get to the top, they relate to where they are coming from. And we are determined to solve women's problems with much empathy and speed. For most women leaders I know, addressing women's problems is not just the right thing, but it becomes a moral obligation. I have said this to some of my friends, like Joya, and I think Dr. Paula Johnson here at Harvard, that I'm not the first vice president of Malawi, but I can say without any fear of contradiction that I'm the first vice president who has used that high platform and space to raise issues of women's empowerment. In 2009 and 2010, I successfully ran a Safe Motherhood campaign that brought maternal health back to the discussion table in my country. I championed the scaling up of prevention of mother-to-child transmission, among other things. Today, expectant women urge their husbands that they can only deliver at a clinic, because that's what Joyce Banda has said. Even before attaining the vice presidency, I successfully championed the passing of the Prevention of Domestic Violence Bill in 2006. This is the connection that women leaders are likely to make with women's issues. The passing of the Domestic Violence Bill in a parliament of 193 members, when women were only 27, is also subject of a whole seminar. I can even write a book just on how we managed to convince the men that time had come for us to have a tool that would protect us against abuse at household level. I'm pleased that there are even many more women leaders that have even done greater work to support my contention that if we have more capable women in leadership positions and are given the necessary instruments, they will change the situation of women and the continent for the better. I will endeavor to give you some examples. President Ellen Sirleaf, who is our beloved president of the continent of Africa, I was saying to some American women, why is it that you haven't had a female president yet? What is it? What is the problem? Ellen Sirleaf, the first elected female president in Africa, is someone that is committed to women's empowerment. She recognized that during the years of strife in her country, market women sustained their families, saved lives, and kept food supplies flowing while they marched and negotiated peace. President Ellen Sirleaf herself, a granddaughter of a market woman, set up the Ellen Johnson Sirleaf Market Women's Fund to help restore their livelihoods as they recover from the 14 years of civil war. This initiative currently reaching out to thousands of women in Liberia and is a clear testimony of women leaders delivering for women. Allow me also to share with you an example of women's leadership working for women. The managing director of the World Bank, Dr. Ngozi Iweala from Nigeria, has not only built a reputation for being the first woman to hold the position of Minister of Finance in her country, she performed successfully in the position. She fearlessly attacked corruption to make her country desirable for foreign investment and job creation, and negotiated her country's debt relief. She is one of our favorite African reformers and is dedicated to supporting women's economic empowerment through an initiative she established, the Makenda Fund. The Makenda Fund hopes to address the problem of women's lack of access to credit. Makenda Fund aims at supporting the growth of women-owned and women-run businesses in Africa. By investing in women-owned businesses in Africa, the Makenda Fund creates wealth and employment generation. Another woman leader working for the good of women is Her Excellency Graça Machel of Mozambique and South Africa's First Lady, former First Lady. Graça Machel, on her 60th birthday, acknowledged that gaining a scholarship to study at university transformed her life and gave her an effective voice. Mrs. Machel said, and I quote, "Education can be the difference between a life of grinding poverty and the potential for a full and secure one," end of quote. With that conviction, Mrs. Machel set up the Graça Machel Scholarship Program in order to support needy girls access higher education as a way of building a critical mass of highly skilled Southern African women who can invest their training, research, and professionalism in Africa. This is a remarkable initiative. Joyce Banda established 4 organizations in Malawi that have reached 200,000 women, established the Joyce Banda Foundation, now with a total of 32,000 beneficiaries, 30 orphan care centers, 3 secondary schools, microfinance orphan care. The list goes on. I could go on and on to provide further examples of how women leaders have proven to work for the betterment of women's conditions, but time will not permit me. I'm however convinced that one of the things that is good for Africa is its women's leadership and voice. Of course, we are seeing progress in African women's participation in leadership, but it is not at the levels we demand. Countries like Rwanda, South Africa, Mozambique, Angola, and Uganda have shown the way that there is power in numbers. However, the lone female voices one encounters in political circles in Africa are insufficient to effect the changes that are so important to women. We need to support more women to get into high leadership positions and sustain them to be there. We need to support women to get into parliament because that's where the laws are made, particularly to change the laws that negatively impact on women and children. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I'm optimistic that those that work for Africa, both Africans and her global partners, will support the cause of women's empowerment in Africa. Africa needs to harness the potential of 1/2 of its population. In fact, more than half. We are 52%. I'm aware of 2 important events that already provide huge opportunities for women's empowerment. One is the launch of the African Women's Decade in October 2010 under the auspices of the African Union. I hope this decade will truly renew efforts to improve women's status on the continent. Second opportunity is the establishment of the agency in the United Nations Women, called the UN Women, which puts together all efforts for women's empowerment and gender equality in the UN. This organization was launched on the 24th February. I'm confident that under the leadership of its executive director, Michelle Bachelet, who I know, and who is a very capable woman who served as Chile's first female president, the UN will pay great attention to improvement of lives of women in Africa. The African Union, the UN Women, and others working in gender have a starting point. The examples that I gave about women leaders working for women are good case studies showing that already there exist tested solutions that can improve women's situation in Africa. However, the challenges that women face in Africa cannot be solved by a few individuals. They need a holistic approach that addresses all the bottlenecks, right from high levels of policy level to point of impact at women's individual levels. I therefore hope that the African Union and the UN will address the strategic issues that higher implementation of effective programs to attain women's empowerment. Some of these problems at country level include lukewarm political commitment. Most of our African governments have signed the necessary instruments and national instruments to improving women's lives. But these signatures do not really translate into tangible action at country level. Governments need to be accountable to women by ensuring that the protocols they sign do not just remain symbolic. Those commitments translate into real positive changes in lives of women. National gender machineries do not have the required power to influence national agenda. Most countries have national machineries that are weak and lack the necessary clout to effectively push for a viable women's agenda. Either they are poorly resourced or are too political to question the status quo. 3, lack of gender skills in key agencies that influence national plans. Lack of strategic gender skills in key institutions like the Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Economic Planning hampers real attention and analysis of national plans and budgets for a gender perspective. For example, a country can have adequate resources allocated to build more schools, but building schools alone cannot result in good enrollment and retention of girls. These need to be complementary programs addressing some underlying practices that hamper girls from going to school. Just like a beautiful, well-staffed and equipped maternity clinic cannot guarantee women will deliver at the clinic if behavioral barriers to safe motherhood have not been systematically addressed. And 4, weakening of women's movement. The trend is worrying. It would appear that the activism on women's rights that was evident before and immediately after Beijing conference in 1995 has worn down. We need the women's movement to sustain our change. We need younger women to be part of the movement for its own sustenance. I know why the movement is weak now. It is because of what the women that came back from Beijing went through. And so it didn't encourage the next generation to join the movement. As you can see, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, the world needs to do more about the situation of women in Africa. For academicians and researchers, I'm sure it is clear that we know what the problems are. We need to invest more in coming up with effective solutions for effective ways of implementing our solutions. We need to find innovative ways of supporting women with economic empowerment activities at wider scale. We need to invest more in girls' education. And I'm of the opinion that more women should be in leadership so that they continue to be the voice, reminding us that as long as women stay in an abusive marriage, they cannot fend for themselves. As long as it costs women their life to give birth to another life in Africa, Africa will not be at peace with itself. Now, given the situation, since there are not as many women in the high corridors of power, we African women also rely on progressive men to support the cause of women's empowerment. Secretary General of the United Nations, Ban Ki-moon, a man who believes in women's empowerment, said something of the significance to my topic today. He said this in Addis Ababa recently during the African Union Heads of State and Government Summit. He said, and I quote, "When women take their rightful place in leadership positions across society, we can unleash Africa's enormous potential." End of quote. And I totally agree with him. He is right. And I want to finish by asking for more male support and accountability in the quest for women's empowerment. I want to assert that the call for women's empowerment is a task that men should partake. And in my African culture, men have become the primary beneficiaries of women's empowerment. And I hope African men find it their moral obligation to support African women to improve their situation. I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Malawian men for standing by us, and especially for standing by Joyce Banda. And I want to thank my husband for being my support. In my case, I've been married twice, so it's easy for anybody in Malawi to know that it depends on what kind of a man you are associated with in order to succeed.